My name is Dan Dorval, and I'm President and CEO of Dorval and Cherney Financial Advisors. I am an independent certified financial planner and author of my book, Financial Success for the Rest of Us, Reality-Based Financial Planning for Mainstream America.
Hi, my name is Leah Woodley. I'm an associate financial advisor with Dorval and Cherney Financial Advisors. Our conversations discuss what it means to do quality of life planning in all areas of your life.
Dan, you had quite an interesting meeting recently with a couple, with one of our nurses who would like to retire and her husband. Why don't you tell us about some of the dynamics of what happened?
Well, I've helped thousands of nurses over the years. I've helped hundreds of them retire. And so I've seen just about everything that you can imagine as far as that group of people. And yet at the same time, I still find myself continuously amazed by some of the things we see every day. In this case, we have a 64-year-old nurse. She's getting closer to 65 pretty soon. At 65, they qualify for their full pension, despite the fact that she's still working. She has worked full time for 45 years at the same health system. So she has worked very, very hard, and she's accumulated a very sizable pension. Now, at the same time, she's married, and her spouse has had some health issues, and he described at length all the reasons why he hasn't worked much for like the last 20 years. And so she has pretty much been, pulling the wagon the whole time with him riding in the wagon. And he's tried to get Social Security disability, but he's not actually disabled. So he's getting denied for Social Security disability, and yet he's making almost no money working. So what we have seen many times is, despite the fact that somebody might not be working, that doesn't mean they're not spending.
Mm.
And so in this case, they were living well beyond their means and had accumulated a shocking $85,000 of consumer debt. So this was a variety of credit cards. This was, different charge accounts that they established wherever they could set them up. And she was working as hard as she could to just juggle payments. And she was paying as much as she could. But, they're paying so much in interest. This is all high interest debt that she's basically just treading water at best. And so she's getting older. She's tired. She's burnt out as a nurse. She's put in a long career. She wants to retire, but she knows she can't because she's got to, pay back all of this money that they owe. So we go through their resources, and I come up with a pretty, unique action plan. This is not a normal action plan, but I started out saying, you might consider bankruptcy because their consumer debt is so substantial. And they didn't want to go down that path, which I commend them for, wanting to pay back what they owe. And so we looked at a plan to do that. And the first thing I had them do was take a 401k loan from her 401k. The max she can get is $50,000. Put it on a 2-year payback plan, which would coincide with her retiring at 67. Then I had her cut her 401k contributions. She was putting in 8%. She only needs to put in 4 to get her full match. So that helps a little bit with cash flow with the ability to pay back this 401k loan. And then that 50,000 would just immediately go to pay off as many cards and charge accounts as they could. And then we were going to take a withdrawal from an old retirement plan she had. It was just sitting in cash anyway, so it wasn't hardly earning anything. And we took that withdrawal, which will be taxable to them. So it's not great, but it'll pay off the rest of their consumer debt. Now that's going to free up thousands of dollars a month in cash flow. So that's what she's going to use to pay back the 401k loan. Now, at the same time, I showed her, at 67, her loan will be paid off in her 401k. She will have her pension, which is the largest pension I have ever seen. She's going to be getting about $6,000 a month of M&A
Wow.
pension, taking it joint with her spouse to help protect him. If you then add in her Social Security at 67, he's got almost no Social Security benefits. So he's going to get half of hers. Half of her benefit is bigger than all of his by quite a bit. So she's going to claim, he's going to claim half of hers. So between Social Security and pension, they're going to actually make more money with guaranteed income than they will with her working. And they're going to have no consumer debt at that point, and their mortgage is modest. So like they're actually going to be okay. So I showed her an action plan, some simple steps to make sure she's going to be okay.
Now, first of all, that is a crazy situation that they were in. But I know sometimes in our meetings, you let the clients know that this is just a band-aid. You think that for me, hearing all of this, it's a bit scary for me because I think there needs to be some habit changes, even though they will have more money in retirement. You don't want them to end back up in the same situation. Was that a concern for you at all?
Well, it's always a concern for us whenever somebody's dealing with a lot of debt because we know that they've been consistently living beyond their means for a long time. And this has been a habit for them for quite a while. And when I explain to them that we're using something like a 401k loan, that's a band-aid. Taking a withdrawal from their retirement account, that's a band-aid. If they come back a year from now, 2 years from now, and they've accumulated significant amounts of credit card or consumer debt again, we're eventually going to run out of band-aids. And I can tell you from experience, it's not like we keep track of statistics, but it's probably about a 50-50 that when I talk to somebody in this type of situation, 50% of the time they'll come back. They've made life-altering changes. They're doing very well. They still, are living now within their means because they paid off all the debt. They got ahead of it. And sometimes, about half the time, they come back and they've accumulated more credit card debt. So I make it abundantly clear in the meetings, but we don't live their lives for them. It's their
Right.
responsibility to be accountable to themselves. But in their case, they have to make fundamental changes because they're at an age where they don't have time to fill in another hole. If they dig another hole, they're going to be in a lot of trouble.
Right. Absolutely. In this type of situation, I know typically we like to see some type of joint account. With this type of situation, would you suggest separating the accounts? Or, I mean, it's really all her money coming in. I mean, what type of protection can she put in place to make sure that the money that is coming in is going to the things where it needs to go and not just being spent, you know, without limit?
Yeah, it's challenging because at their age, it's not like I'm going to tell them how to handle their income every month.
Right.
They have to be adults about it, and they have to be responsible and accountable to themselves. So, and she was handling the finances, but I think he was spending a lot on very large purchases. So, vehicles, a camper, a boat. There were things that they had done that got them behind. And then I think they
Yeah.
used the credit cards to rationalize purchases that are necessities, like, buying food or going out, not necessarily going out to eat, but I think they were rationalizing a lot of their needs as credit card expenses because they were spending all the money before that, on bigger
Mhm.
things that were wants. So, we see that quite a bit. And in this case, I think it was the man that was primarily driving a lot of the overspending, and she was just working really hard to support it. Um, it was frustrating because when I laid out this whole plan, a big part of the quality of life planning aspect was, she's coming up on 65. She's worked for 45 years and she's tired. She's getting
Mhm.
burnt out. And so she wanted to cut back and transition her way into retirement at 67. And, she gets to claim her pension at 65 coming up. Her pension income will offset the fact that I showed her she could cut back from full time to like zero point 0.7 or zero point 0.8 or something like that, work a little less, do that for a couple years and then retire. And she was very excited about that opportunity to be able to start to phase towards retirement. And, the husband, after I get done explaining all of this process, he goes, well, that sounds good, but what if she just kept working full time even when she's collecting her pension? wouldn't we have more money to spend that way? And I'm like, there's a lot of gall there for somebody to say something like that when they have not been working hardly at all. And she's been working full time for all this time. And I said, hey, it's easy for you to say when you're not the one working full time as a nurse at her age and having done this for as long as she has. That is a very challenging type of work. And let's focus on her quality of life and trying to get her to a point of where she can feel better about, working and continuing to pay these bills. And he kind of shut up about it. But, I think she felt intimidated to some extent because she doesn't really know a lot about financial stuff.
Mhm.
And he was just spending, and I think she was going along with it to kind of go along to get along type of thing. And it was a hard conversation.
Well, I'm glad that she had you in her corner to kind of advocate, not just for her, but just the best for them both, because it seems like she needed a voice. And it's sometimes best to have a third party who's unattached to the situation to provide that insight and that wisdom. How often do you see scenarios like this?
Well, unfortunately, I mean, I'm not going to say that it's common, but I also don't know that I would say it's completely uncommon. We see quite a few situations where there will be, particularly men, because we're working with nurses, so our primary clients are usually women, and a lot of their spouses, for whatever reason, will their goal is to actually get on disability. And if they're successful, they're happy just sitting around not doing anything and collecting Social Security disability, despite the fact that they could probably work in some capacity. And we've seen a lot of nurses carrying the weight for their families. And we talk all the time about nurses are caregivers, and they have a tendency to think about others before themselves, often to their own detriment.
Mhm.
And so we do see quite a few situations where they're working as hard as they can to keep the ship afloat, and they're struggling to tread water, and eventually they start to go under. So we have to make changes at some point, and that's a big part of what our program does for these nurses.
Yeah, I'm glad she had the opportunity to meet with us. And under our group agreement, I don't know what she would have done if she didn't have this opportunity. And it was good that there was a fix available. Sometimes things get to a point where it may be too far gone. So it was good that she was able to come in at this time and still have some breathing room to try to get things in order. So I think some key takeaways here definitely live beneath your means. You never want to get to this point where debt becomes overwhelming and you're struggling to make life decisions because you have this debt. I mean, working for over 40 years is a lot. It's really a lot on your body, a lot on your mental health. And so I think that just living beneath your means helps to mitigate some of that stress. Another thing is there are other means of getting out of debt. So I thank you for sharing about the 401k loan. Now, there is a caveat with that. If you do take a 401k loan out to pay off debt, you have to be aware that if for whatever reason you leave employment, you sometimes have to pay it back immediately. Sometimes there's a limited time frame in which you have to pay that money back. So if you're watching this and you're considering a 401k loan, you do want to be mindful of that. Anything else you want to add, Dan?
Well, in her case, she was over 59 and a half. So if she did ultimately, let's say she has a health issue or something, she can't work for the 2 years to pay it back, she would end up probably taking a withdrawal from her 401k anyway. It would be considered, she wouldn't be penalized. She'd have to pay tax on it, but she wouldn't be penalized. Somebody out there who's under 59 and a half, who's also looking at a 401k loan, now if they default on that loan because they lost their job or whatever reason, now they're talking about a penalty of 10% plus the income tax, and now it becomes a very inefficient use of money. So, I don't like to use these band-aids. In a perfect world, I would love for nobody to have to take a 401k loan, or I would love for her not to have to take a withdrawal right now from her retirement to be able to pay back these loans. But ultimately, it's the most efficient way for her to do it, regardless of the tax consequences or anything else, because the interest rates on these credit cards are, 20+%. So we do what we have to do in order to maximize the resources you have available to improve quality of life.
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing so much good information and allowing us to see real life experiences and real life cases because sometimes these things apply to people who are viewing this as well. So we thank you for tuning into this video. And until next time, have a good one.
Thanks, Leah.
Thank you.